I felt like my life was taking over control of me, and I just had no other choice but to go along with it, no matter how fast that felt. And what that exercise showed me is there were some extracurricular activities that I was putting on my plate that I could say no to. There were some friendships that I was investing in that I would leave and didn't quite feel like my cup was full, which I didn't have to keep investing in.
Welcome back to Working with Feeling. This is Orange Shy, somatic leadership coach, and your host. Today, we've got a great conversation with my friend Marissa Morrison, VP of People at ZipRecruiter. Marissa started her career in management consulting at PwC, advising the world's largest technology companies on their people and organizational strategies. She later worked at LinkedIn, that's where the two of us met, where she led programs across the company's global talent organization. At both PwC and LinkedIn, Marissa founded and led employee resource groups that advocate for enhanced accessibility and allyship for people with disabilities. After LinkedIn, Marissa served on the exec team at a number of VC-backed startups, leading the people function through mergers, acquisitions, and rapid scale. In this rich and grounded conversation with Marissa, she shares her journey from burnout to clarity and the small but really powerful practices that she's brought to herself and to her teams. Things like monthly prioritization check-ins, walk and talks, resets when joining a meeting, signing out of Zoom, and just getting on the phone a little bit more often. And this goes beyond hacks. These are culture shaping moves that remind us that we have agency in the face of the inherited urgency that's so common within companies. If you appreciate the message we're promoting through Working with Feeling, please leave a review, share an episode with a friend, and let us know what you'd like to hear more of. Enjoy this conversation with Marissa Morrison. So much of the value when we're doing deeper development work is in first pausing and kind of developing a muscle of taking a step back, taking a breath, introducing reflection into our routine, these kinds of things. And there's that pride in this is a fast-paced environment and things are happening and there's a sense of urgency. And many of us who have grown up through these environments begin to internalize that really like at a body physical level. It can be very challenging to pattern interrupt that, pause, and allow ourselves that opportunity to do something like what you described. Let's
Mhm,
zoom out for a second.
mhm.
Let's take a breath and revisit what are the big rocks? What are the priorities? So I'm curious what you may have noticed in implementing these kinds of practices within your teams.
Yes. Mostly what I've noticed is clarity. And I'm a big believer that all things stem from either clarity or lack of clarity, and that the best thing I can give myself is clarity about my life. And the best thing that I can give my teams is clarity around my expectations and priorities and non priorities. So, coming from that foundational standpoint, the pause is so important to really get clear on where are we even going. I heard a statistic yesterday that is since COVID or in the last 5 years, we innovate 100 times more quickly than we did the 5 years ago. And so much of that is the speed at which we're navigating AI in our workplaces, in our lives, hybrid work, remote work, distributed work. So much of our world is different. And every year it's faster and faster paced at how the speed of things change. And so I think to keep up with that, we have to pause and really think about, okay, of these trends, what am I going to spend my time leaning into? Of all of the interesting topics I could research on a given day, what am I going to spend my time doing? Of all of the hot priorities that I could be focused on at work, what do I say yes to? What do I say no to? And I think just the speed of change around us can easily put that pressure on us that we also have to change and move and go as quickly as we can. And I think that's causing a lot of burnout. And I also think it's causing a lot of non-productive spinning where people are doing 20 things in a day when probably 18 aren't that useful. So really have been trying for myself to get a grasp on sanity, both in my personal life, but then also for my teams to make sure that we are constantly calibrating at the most important work product that we should be focused on to say, let's take steps back. Let's make sure we really are focusing on those right things, which is hard because you look around and it's really easy to want to take on everything that you can all at once.
In a moment, we'll shift toward more of what's supported you in actually being able to integrate this way of being into how you work. But I'm curious to start around the team and how you support the team in getting there, in part because leaders I interact with on a day-to-day basis often have this challenge of whether it's somebody who's new, who comes in from a different culture, or somebody who's just part of another team and feels like the way to get seen and rewarded is by doing all the things. An inbound request comes in from another department. I got to do that and do it well and do it fast to show that that's the kind of performer I am. And when many of us have developed that way of working over a period of time, it is not the easiest thing to transition away from, even if the leader we're now working with encourages us to do so. So anything that's been supportive for you to bring to your teams to kind of be like, no, really, I'm not just saying take your break. I'm not just saying, peel it back and decide what's important. This is actually core to the way I want us to be working.
I say to my teams often, simplification is the best thing we can do. I lead multiple people departments, so everything we launch touches our entire employee base. So if we deliver something that's overly complex, there's a mental burden that now we're putting on our total population. There's a strategic way that we simplify, which really goes to monthly priority touch bases that I've put into place where at the start of every month, we talk about what are the 3 things that you're going to prioritize this month. And what that does is take off the 8 things you could have prioritized or worked on and really gets clear on there can't be more than 3 things that we're prioritizing in a given month. So I think that is a good way from a strategic standpoint and an alignment standpoint to make sure we have the right priorities in place. And then there's a ton of little implementations that I've started to put into place that I think leaders can model. Some of that is just the reminder that not everything needs to be a 30-minute Zoom call. I think a lot of us are trapped in meeting fatigue. So really setting the stage with some of my directs where we might have a brainstorming walk and talk, which is for 30 minutes, let's both go outside or walk around our home and then talk about some of those more strategic conversations if you're stuck on something. But I think those breaks can help us also pause, think clearly, and break out of the norm. And so much of that, I think, is the little things that you can implement on a regular basis. Telling my team, we can talk on the phone. Not everything has to be a Zoom call. So if you just want a quick question answered or need quick support, let's lean on multiple modalities available to us in a distributed environment. And I think those practices, even though they're little, give this sense of relief for different type of thinking, for the pause even of I'm standing up out of my chair, I'm getting my cell phone and I'm calling somebody, walking around instead of just being in the back and forth rut of crossing one thing off of your calendar after the next without really being thoughtful about some type of intervention and change to get us to think differently. So I think a lot of it is changing our thought patterns to be agile so that we are thinking more creatively and differently throughout the day.
And there's research behind these kinds of interventions, and yet I don't see them implemented consistently very often. And I think there are a couple of reasons that you actually pointed to. One is it requires beating that drum, like actually bringing it up time and time again because it is new for many people. And when you're integrating new practices, just like we know about habits, it takes time for these things to form. It takes time to click in. Oh, that's right. There's a new possibility here. There's a new kind of pathway that I can go down. The second piece is there's the ritualistic aspect to it, where there's a cadence of effectively saying, okay, we have this practice now that we're going to do to support our ability to think this way, to support our ability to access more creativity. We have these different tools that we can draw upon. And it's so common to hear kind of the refrain of, let's think creatively about this. Let's get outside the box around this. Let's brainstorm around this. But we're still sitting in the same seat, looking at the same screen, in the same environment. And what supports us actually shifting into a different way of being is changing up our physical orientation, maybe
Mm-hmm.
even changing up the cadence of our breath, our environment. These are things that actually take us out of our typical way of thinking. And it's so simple. And yet also, I think for many people, it almost, I think they can be afraid to offer these as possibilities. What are your thoughts around that?
I have empathy for people in perhaps a more junior role in a distributed environment. I'm a people leader, so I think a lot about the employee experience. I think it's hard when you're used to wanting to show face, where you want to show engagement, to say, I've been on Zoom calls all day. Can I just pick up the phone and call you? Or some days, and I've even found this with my teens, where if I have a day with less meetings, which are generally, if I'm lucky, on a Friday, I try to move as many phone calls, if not all of my meetings, to phone calls. And I'd had my team ask, oh, are you traveling today? Are you somewhere not at home? And I'm exactly in the same place I always am, but it just helps me think more creatively. And just sharing that experience, I think for me as a leader with my team, that it is completely okay to give me a call. Not every time has to be a video call, gives them permission.
I think what you bring up there, and I agree, modeling it is one of the most effective ways, and also can be such a small step where we can just engage in whatever behavior it is, asking to switch to the phone for a particular call, maybe even saying that we're walking around during the call to help us think, and then offering it at the end of that conversation, hey, if you ever want to walk and talk, just let
Mhm.
me know. And it doesn't need to be like a formal memo or email that goes out.
Right.
We can just start to do it and invite other people to do the same. And so it can be a lighter lift often than we think.
Definitely.
So let's switch gears to the qualities that support a way of being as a leader and with respect to teaming that is present, that is creative, and that is connected. Where I know you and I have had some conversations around some of the things that support us as individuals to be able to model these qualities, offer them to the environment we're in. And I can remember it had to be one of the first conversations we ever had. I want to say on the 17th floor cafe of LinkedIn San Francisco. And there's sometimes you can just kind of sense that, okay, this person seems very grounded. There are some practices that they're doing to support them in cultivating that state. And that's what opened up in some of the conversations we've had since, these modes of exploring ourselves and giving ourselves what we need in order to cultivate a state that supports us in showing up the way we intend to in these environments, how essential that is. And some people listening are probably at different places in that exploration. So some may have gone on different forms of retreats before, have taken different types of classes, read the books. Others maybe are even just the idea of, connecting breath, body is relatively new at this stage. But regardless, there is a real value, I think, in hearing from you as a leader who's been so successful in moving through your career. And from what I've seen, really, I hesitate to use the word maintaining, but continuously showing up with this kind of state and having that be really core to your style. So maybe we can start with number one, like, where's the motivation for that? What drives you to continue connecting with yourself, your breath, your body, your mind in a way that supports you in showing up in this way?
I think it all starts with the question, who am I becoming? How do I want to show up? And most of all, probably, am I enjoying my life? And I have always been mindful about wanting to enjoy whatever season that I'm in. And that goes for the peaks and that goes for the valleys. And it could be somewhat of a growth mindset of how I'm wired, but really wanting to appreciate and be aware of the season I'm in. And I think it goes to this desire to live my life in the most fulfilled way as possible. Before I had a mindfulness practice or even the awareness or maturity that I have now, it started with just listening to like, I think there's something more, or don't really like how I feel every day. I started my career, my first chapter was management consulting. I had a 9-month engagement where every Monday I flew from San Francisco to Atlanta, Georgia. Every Thursday I flew home from Atlanta, Georgia, back to San Francisco. I would try to do fun things on the weekend. I was on a nonprofit board. I was volunteering at my church. I had friends and I felt exhausted all the time. And I remember thinking, I don't know that every young 20-something is supposed to feel this way. And my initial thought was, can I just keep track and a list of all the things that I enjoy and all the things that I don't enjoy on a daily basis? That included tasks at work. That included extracurricular activities. That included friendships that I enjoyed or didn't enjoy. But I think it really comes down to listening to that intuitive feeling around, am I showing up how I want to show up? Am I enjoying my time and how I'm spending it? And remembering that we have full autonomy and control around how we spend our time. I always say when I first thought of doing that exercise, I did not feel like I was in control. I felt like my life was taking over control of me, and I just had no other choice but to go along with it, no matter how fast that felt. And what that exercise showed me is there were some extracurricular activities that I was putting on my plate that I could say no to. There were some friendships that I was investing in that I would leave and didn't quite feel like my cup was full, which I didn't have to keep investing in. And there were some tasks, even in my work, and again, this was early on in my career, that I realized I could prioritize at different parts of the day, and that would help me be more productive. So tiny things I would implement were Monday mornings, if I could have less meetings and more time to get productive work done, that was a really great time for me to put my best thinking power to use. And if I could have meetings later in the afternoon, that was a better time for me because my brain was in a state after lunch where I felt more social and I could be more engaged in a meeting. But if I just jumped into a meeting, that would eat up so much of my brain power that trying to get my most productive, creative work done in the afternoon didn't work. Those tiny little tweaks gave me the energy and gave me the stamina to keep going and feel like I had more control over my life. Then fast forwarding, I've done several 10-day silent meditation retreats. I have learned a lot about my own energy just through lots of what are things that I'm enjoying in my life, what are things that I'm not, and it changes over the past decade plus. They've definitely changed. You will evolve and change as you grow, but I think it's just being constantly aware of that inner feeling when something feels off and being willing to explore it.
One thing that you touched on there that I think is easy to gloss over and is so important in being able to develop in this way that we're talking about is you mentioned this thing that is like, it didn't feel right. It didn't feel me, maybe would be another way to put it. And I think there's many of us are encouraged to just continue kind of pushing through that. Oh, it's normal. You're not supposed to enjoy work. You're not supposed to feel energetic all the time, or like sometimes you're going to be tired because you're working really hard, and that's just part of it. That's part of life. And I think what we recognize when we bring curiosity to it is no, this is actually detracting from everything. in my life. It's detracting from my ability to work well and to enjoy life. And that's something that I think is so easy in the inherited hustle culture. And this is one of the really powerful things that I think exists in this space of people who are bringing more of that curiosity to, wait a second, is this way of being actually me? Or is this something that I've just taken on because I learned I did really well in school and that got me good things, and as a great athlete and that got me good things. And so I keep doing things in this way. And so opening up, there are other ways of being. Many of us just don't have models. Going back to that concept, we don't really have models in our lives of ways of bringing that curiosity to our experience and learning more about what does it mean to actually come from my center or come from what is authentically me as compared to the me that I've learned to be, than that I should be. Maybe we can explore that a bit more. And I asked it initially in terms of motivation, but from this other lens of that knowing that I think so many have and sometimes hold on to without exploring it or even sharing that with other people for a long time. What do you feel might be supportive to others who have that sense and may not feel like they have the way to begin exploring it, or even maybe their relationships in their lives that would be supportive of doing that, bring that curiosity and doing that exploration?
I think in today's environment, it feels so scary to spend time alone, but I really think we have to be able to have that awareness. So the first exercise I would say to somebody that is perhaps new to this, sort of feeling like something is off but doesn't know where to start, is spend 30 minutes alone with no phone, no technology. It can be a walk, but you can't have a podcast on or music. And you have to just let yourself think, because oftentimes your brain will have an idea, but we don't give ourselves any quiet. I have no idea on the research around this, but I would just go out on a limb and say very few people spend time alone on a regular basis without technology. I will credit a lot to Julia Cameron and The Artist's Way. I think it's a beautiful book. I think it's highly helpful for anybody trying to tap into their inner self. And a big part of what I find helpful, which I've actually had a practice since I was 10 years old, which journaling has always been something to me that's given me insight and helped me process. So when I was little, if I were going through something, I would write a short story about it, or I would just journal my feelings about something. I have no idea where that came from. But The Artist's Way really supports this practice of morning pages, which is 3 free-flowing pages of your inner thoughts. And I think for somebody that's trying to get to, has to be something more, or I just feel off, or maybe you feel great, but you want to get more curious about your life, you have to spend time with yourself. And I think the analogy would be, if you're trying to get to know a new friend, how do you get to know a new friend? Spend time with them one-on-one. You ask them questions. You explore what their motivators are, what is happy in their life, maybe where they're finding some sorrow. I would encourage people to take themselves on a date, and whether it's free flow writing or just spending time alone, really seeing what comes up. And that's been a good way for me to have some of the best revelations in my life, is just going through that writing practice or making sure I'm spending some time alone, and recognizing that that is a bit countercultural today. But I really think there's tremendous benefit with that. And what I find after being alone or having a consistent practice with writing is it goes back to that clarity. And in the same way with starting with a monthly priority check-in with my teams, you can have clarity that helps you speed up through the rest of the month. If you know where you're going, if you know how you want to spend your time, if you know what you want to change in your life, you have the ability and the clarity to then go do it. But I think so many of us are still doing, I'll go back to early 20s me, the 20 things in a given week, where half of them or more are just not productive or cup filling or necessary. And we don't really stop to question, can I take some of that off my plate? Or am I even really enjoying all of the things that I'm doing on a regular basis?
To me, this gets at the pervasiveness of being on autopilot effectively that has just become normal to go from one thing to the next. And how much of a superpower really it affords you if you're one of the few people taking space from the technology, from the deluge of information, from all the stimulation, and just allowing yourself to be with their thoughts. And even better, I love the morning page recommendation. It's something I recommend to many people. You're effectively getting through all the layers of thought that likely don't even belong to you, that
Hmm.
don't even come from you. They're just thoughts that are circulating around in the mind. And when we can just develop that way of free flow writing and just getting it out onto the paper, I don't think I've had one person of the many that I've recommended this practice to has come back to me and said anything less than just doing that just for the first few days has helped me connect to myself and my thoughts in a way that I don't know that I ever have.
Absolutely.
Because we just don't realize how much we're influenced by all the stimulus and all the information we're exposed to, which is far beyond what our brain and nervous system has been designed to be exposed to.
100% yes. As you were talking, what kept coming up in my mind is like, it's about being present in your own life. And I think that is so much what breath work is about, what mindfulness practice is about, even authenticity and experiencing joy. And joy doesn't mean things are always going well, but it's about being present and accepting whatever is going on in your life. And I think that's what the pause gives you. That's what morning pages can give you. And the awareness is I have always felt this desire to be present in my own life and to be the owner of my own life. And to your point, exactly, to get off of that autopilot, it's the pause and it's the being present so that you can make sure you're choosing the life and the decisions that you want. But it does require some mindfulness about the choices that we're making and the autopilot that we have currently on.
There's a somewhat well-known quote from, I want to say, a French philosopher. I'm definitely not going to get it verbatim here, but it's something to the effect of all of our problems as humanity would be solved if each of us spent some time sitting in a room alone, just sitting in quiet.
Yes.
And I think there's a lot of truth to that, and just how much the way I often refer to it is this backlog of stuff that's there with us all the time that needs to be processed, how present that is, and how that can crowd out space for creativity and for being present with what's actually here in front of us. What's the possibility that's here?
Yes, absolutely. And I think we can let ourselves become influenced so much by what we see and what we hear. And I even want to call out, I know for a lot of people, your parents might have a loud voice, your boss might have a loud voice in the expectations and the shoulds. I think that to really live a life that we are proud of, that we are present in, I would even get curious about that and explore how many of those expectations are real and then how many of them are relevant and should be acted on because, I'm speaking from a place where my parents have really never put stark expectations on me. Their dream for me is always, I want you to be happy. But I know that there's a lot of people whose parents might put pressure on them or whose boss might put pressure on them and might be listening to us and saying, well, easy for you to say if you had all the options in the world, but you don't know who I report to. You don't know who my parents are. And I would really encourage the challenging of some of those expectations and also just the curiosity of writing down all of the expectations or the voices in our head that are telling us we can or can't do something and challenging and seeing if those are really true and seeing again which of those we might have more control over than we really think. Because I think for a lot of people, this work is scary or it is intimidating because we can feel out of control because of all those various external factors. And I think my message is we have a lot more autonomy and control over our lives and can create a new narrative much more than maybe sometimes we feel empowered to do. And I think that is the first step. It's taking ownership to say, I own the happiness and the presence and the choices that are ahead of me. So let me get very clear on the voices currently in my head and the messages I think I'm being told so that I can chart a new path, and starting with just the awareness of all of those voices and maybe expectations.
This is to me one of the takeaways that I appreciate from this conversation is something that we often see when it comes to any type of change is that for some of us, we can, for whatever reason, our prior experience in life, certain relationships that we have, we can see possibility that others can't see, and vice versa. They can see possibilities that we can't. And there's so much power in asking that question of, wait a second, what if there are possibilities that I just haven't seen yet? How can I maybe even connect with people who are seeing things that I'm not seeing? This is one of the beautiful things about somatic work in particular, from my perspective, is that there's an emphasis on the relational and how our relationship, not only with ourselves and with other people, but also with our environments and the context we've moved through in our lives, they shape what we see as possibility and what we miss. Just remembering that and that that's how our brains are shaped over time can be a helpful way to say, okay, what would it look like for me to expand my perception of what's possible here? And then I can take it or leave it.
That's exactly right. I was just talking to somebody at work yesterday about a mistake that they had made, and they were saying how they felt really silly that they made this mistake. And I was sharing our brains are such a complex operating system, and we can reprogram them whenever we want. And there have been times and chapters in my life where I felt like I was completely out of control with all of the obligations and expectations that I put on myself. And instead of looking back and saying, well, gosh, like for those 2 years, I was so burned out. Why did I let myself get to that point? But instead saying, I've now reprogrammed my brain to know when I feel a certain way, I'm going to pause. Or when I feel a certain way, I'm going to default every invitation to a no until I'm feeling energized again. It's reminding ourselves that we can reprogram our mindset to whatever it is that we want it to be. And so often the thoughts that we tell ourselves are, I have no control in this. There's no end. I just have to be on this hamster wheel. I have to keep going and there's no way out. But we have the ability to reprogram our brains to say, I can choose to say no. And that is an upgrade that we can have, that then going forward, you take that and you stack it on to every other practice. Maybe it's your morning pages or breath work, or I know I always feel better when I work out 3 times a week. I am going to prioritize that because I know that will help me show up better. And that's your upgrade where, great, now you understand your operating system not much better. That's a program that you can implement. And I think it's those little learnings over time where you're able to get to that point where you look around and you think, week over week, I've I've lived a better life for me. This is more enjoyable. I'm having more fun. And I ultimately think that is the goal, that we enjoy our lives and we remind ourselves that you don't have to stay in a job that you hate, or friendships that aren't life-giving, or routines that don't feel like they are supporting you. And those small minor tweaks can add up over time.
I think that's a good place to make a plug for the role of safety in changing. So sometimes, and I believe this is in part what you were alluding to, sometimes we think, oh, I can't make a change right now. And what we're saying often is effectively, it's not safe for me to make a change right now.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that is very much the case.
Mm-hmm.
Other times we're telling ourselves that we're not safe because we've learned through our experience that a situation is not safe. And that's where it becomes really helpful to have another person, a trusted friend, a coach, a mentor, who you can connect with around this and get a sense of, okay, is it actually that I'm not safe? Or is that just the way I'm perceiving this situation and I perceive myself to be more threatened than I am? Because that physiology of being in threat is going to keep us from changing every time.
That's
So
right.
it's one of those yes and of yes, listen to that, and don't necessarily let it direct the action that you take without going back to that curiosity, questioning it, getting to know it more, turning toward it, maybe writing about it, connecting with someone else about it. And I think therein lies the juice when it comes to being able to take advantage of that agency and give ourselves the change we need is, oh yeah, we do have like very human needs in order to be prepared to make these changes. And sometimes we just learned that X, Y, Z is evidence that I'm not prepared to do so.
Mhm.
And so what I really value in what you've shared is being in that place of continuous questioning doesn't commit you to taking any action that you might not want to take or anything. It's just about asking the question
Right.
and bringing that curiosity to like, what is coming up through me? What is this, impulse that I feel to take this behavior or to not go for this thing?
Absolutely. I talk to my teams a lot about this thought of 10% better and how we should really regularly strive to look for that 10% better. Where are the improvements maybe on a program that we've launched? How can we do meetings a little bit better? And I think it goes with this theme too, which the intent is not to completely throw your life in upheaval and say, I hate my job. I'm going to quit. Not everybody can quit. And I know that that is the reality for many people. So it's not the complete overhaul, but it's the how can I find those 10% better improvement so that on a macro level, I'm enjoying my life more, or I am more present, or I am more connected in myself. And that often then trickles into when the personal life is good, work life is better. Your work life is better, your personal life seems to be going better. So I think it's finding that 10% or the agency where you can and goes back to really checking in what are the things that fill your cup so that even if you're in a job you can't quit, but you're not enjoying, you've got the workout routine. You're mindful about what would make the next job great. And you can start taking agency to maybe explore that. Or you just have that better sense of awareness about your energy and your drainers. And then you can make choices from there.
So we've covered a number of different practices throughout the conversation. And I like to ask guests if there's a particular practice that either they most enjoy or that's most contributed to that type of presence that you were describing a moment ago that is so important to you because you've seen the benefits of it personally and professionally. Any other practices that you like to leave our listeners with?
I would recommend everyone do a life audit every 6 months. And often what that looks like is for me, it's a wheel of all of the different buckets, whether that's emotional, relational, financial, spiritual, professional, the big buckets in your life, and checking in on where the areas that you're deficient, where would you like to spend more time or more energy, and where maybe do you feel like you're tapped out and you want to pull back. But something that's been the most help for me is really deeply accepting that nothing has to be part of my routine forever. And there have been moments where I am obsessed with yoga and I'm doing it 5 days a week. And I think this is incredible. And then years where I've gone without a yoga practice. And I think it's about being aware of what do you need in this season. And I've been an athlete most of my life. I've always enjoyed physical activity. And there has come a point where I've realized waking up early and meditating for 30 minutes is going to help me more than doing a 30-minute HIIT workout. And if I told that to myself in my 20s, I'd probably think that's absolutely ridiculous. Like, go for the workout. But really being okay with switching things out depending on the season that you're in, I think is a very helpful practice. And I think just taking that inventory about every 6 months, looking at your calendar and literally removing things that are not getting you to the place that you want to get to frequently and regularly, I think is really important. And sometimes, again, going on the autopilot, we can forget to do that, or we tend to label ourselves, I'm a yogi. Of course, I'm always going to do yoga. But you might get to a point where it's just not the thing you need. And that's okay to lay things down and set things down. So I think that tip has been super helpful for me.
I needed someone to tell me that about 10 years ago. I had to learn that lesson really in the hard way multiple times. But that emphasis of the seasons and attending to the seasons and evolving, and we can continue questioning, we continue learning new things about ourselves. Some things emerge that surprise us, and that's part of what keeps things interesting.
Yes.
Marissa, I want to thank you so much for being here, for sharing just the intentionality that you show up with. It's something I so admire. And my whole goal with this podcast is to support more leaders who can bring these qualities into the way that we work. I really believe it can change everything. So please let us know, how can people find you, learn more about you, or in general, just learn about some of the things that you've experienced?
Yes. Check out The Artist's Way. I think it's a great book. I would highly recommend that. Follow content, or and you share so much great content on LinkedIn. I think certainly if this is of interest, give yourself the education of all that's out there and educate yourself on some of these practices, because those tidbits that you share are super helpful. And if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, Marissa Morrison.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I hope this was helpful for you. Please share your feedback with me, find me on LinkedIn, and please leave a review. Share this with a friend. Let's bring more people into the conversation around working with feeling at the root of all the growth, all the evolution we're going for. It starts with feeling.